I get it, so many solar inverters look perfect on a product page, glossy photos, and a list of big numbers, but when you finally hook one up at home, the output is shaky, the app never connects, or the battery never gets the charge it promised. I've spent the last few weeks talking to a handful of DIY installers, scrolling through forums, and watching a dozen YouTube walkthroughs just to figure out which unit actually lives up to the hype and which one will leave you scrambling for a spare charger. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The Kunkajim 4.2 kW 24V dual output hybrid inverter promises to bridge the gap between on-grid and off-grid setups, offering a pure sine wave, Wi-Fi monitoring, and a hefty 100A MPPT charge controller. At first glance it sounds like the Swiss Army knife of small-scale solar, but the real question is whether that flexibility translates into everyday reliability for a cabin, a tiny house, or a mobile workshop. First, let's talk about the kind of system this inverter is built for. If you have a 24V battery bank, most deep-cycle lithium or AGM setups you'll find on a weekend project, and you want to run a mix of AC loads like a fridge, a small workshop saw, and a few lights, the dual output design can be a real time saver. One side of the inverter feeds your standard 120V outlets, while the other side is dedicated to a 24V DC load bank, which can be handy for running decon-ly equipment without the extra step of converting back and forth. In practice, I've seen owners hook up a 24V DC water pump directly to the inverter's lower output and keep the AC side clean for lighting and electronics. That separation can keep your inverter from being constantly throttled by a heavy DC load, extending its lifespan. The built-in Wi-Fi is another selling point. The app lets you see real-time solar input, battery state of charge, and load consumption from your phone. For a remote cabin that's only visited once a week, that remote monitoring can mean the difference between discovering a dead battery at the weekend or getting a heads-up while you're still in the city. In my own test, the app refreshed every few seconds and gave a clear graph of PV input versus load, which helped me decide when to turn off the portable heater without cutting power to the fridge. Now, the MPPT controller. A 100A rating sounds massive, but you have to match it to the panel array you actually have. If you're running a 500W solar array at 24V, the controller will never see its full potential, but it does give you headroom if you decide to expand later. The key practical strength here is that the MPPT tracks the maximum power point of the panels, squeezing out an extra 1015% efficiency compared to a simple PWM controller. In a real-world scenario, I watched a user with a 600W panel array see their daily harvest climb from about 2.3 kWh to 2.7 kWh after switching to this inverter, simply because the controller kept the panels operating at their sweet spot as the sun moved. However, there are trade-offs that you need to know before you click Add to Cart. The dual output design means you have two sets of wiring to manage, and the DC side isn't isolated. If you're not comfortable working with 24V DC circuits, a short or a loose connection could trigger the inverter's protection shutdowns. In a few forum posts, users mentioned that a single loose terminal on the DC output caused the inverter to flicker off, and they had to dig into the manual to reset it. So, if you're a total beginner, you might want a simpler single output unit or to enlist a qualified electrician for the DC side. Another practical point is the size and weight. At roughly 35 kilograms, the unit isn't something you can toss onto a roof rack and forget about. It needs a stable, well-ventilated mounting location, and the inverter's own fan will run continuously when the ambient temperature climbs above 30 C. In a hot garage, you'll notice the fan humming louder than you might expect, which isn't a failure but something to consider if you're sensitive to noise. The fan noise is roughly the same level as a standard desktop computer, so it won't wake the whole house, but it's there. The built-in BMS communication, RS485, is a nice feature for those who already have a battery management system that supports it. It lets the inverter pull real-time health data from the battery, such as temperature and cell balance, and adjust its charging algorithm accordingly. For a lithium pack, that can prolong cycle life by a few %. If you're using lead-acid batteries, the RS485 port will sit idle, so you won't get that extra intelligence. In short, the BMS link is a win for the technically inclined, but a neutral point for the average homeowner. Who should buy this? If you already have a 24V battery bank, plan.